What happens when you finally admit to your husband that you want to date other men, and instead of begging you to stay, he calmly hands you legal papers? Can someone really be the villain if all they do is protect themselves when you push things too far? This is the moment I realized my plan to upgrade my life was about to cost me everything. The morning light filtered through our kitchen blinds as I adjusted my new blouse for the third time. I'd bought it specifically because the color brought out my eyes. At least, that's what Callum had said yesterday when I described it to him over text. The silk fabric felt expensive against my skin, a small rebellion against the mundane routine that had become my marriage to Deacon. "Morning," Deacon mumbled, not looking up from his phone as he scrolled through work emails. His coffee sat cooling beside his elbow, forgotten like so many things in our relationship these days. "Good morning," I replied, my voice carrying just a hint of expectation. I stood there, waiting for him to notice the effort I'd put into my appearance. The new blouse, the carefully applied makeup, the way I'd styled my hair differently. Surely he'd say something. But Deacon remained absorbed in his screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the soft clicking of his thumbs on the keyboard and the distant sound of our 6-year-old daughter, Elsie, getting ready upstairs. "Do you like my new top?" I asked finally, unable to bear his indifference any longer. Deacon glanced up briefly, his eyes scanning me with the same distracted attention he might give to a weather report. "It's nice," he said, already looking back at his phone. "Did you remember to pay the electric bill?" The dismissal stung more than it should have. Here I was, trying to reconnect, trying to bring some spark back into our relationship, and he was worried about utility bills. I felt the familiar resentment bubbling up inside me, hot and bitter. "That's it? Just nice?" I crossed my arms, watching as his shoulders tensed. He knew that tone in my voice. We'd been down this road before. "Oenone, I'm sorry, but I have this presentation today and—" "There's always something," I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Always work, always bills, always something more important than your wife." Deacon set his phone down with deliberate care, the kind of measured movement that meant he was trying to control his temper. "That's not fair. You know how important this project is. And you know how important I am, or at least I used to think you did." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation. I watched his face, looking for any sign that he understood what I was really saying, that I felt invisible, neglected, taken for granted, but his expression remained frustratingly neutral. "Mummy? Daddy?" Elsie's voice drifted down from the top of the stairs, small and uncertain. "Can someone help me find my backpack?" Deacon stood immediately, grateful for the interruption. "I'll get it," he said, but I was already moving. "I'll handle it," I snapped, brushing past him toward the stairs, since apparently I'm the only one who pays attention to what our daughter needs. I heard his sharp intake of breath behind me, but I didn't turn around. Let him stew on that. Let him think about how his neglect affected not just me, but Elsie too. Upstairs, I found Elsie sitting on her bed, her small face scrunched with worry. She was such a sensitive child, always picking up on the tension between Deacon and me, even when we tried to hide it. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, forcing my voice into gentle tones as I located her backpack behind her bedroom door. "Mummy's here." "Are you and Daddy fighting again?" she asked quietly, her dark eyes, so much like Deacon's, searching my face. "We're just talking, baby. Sometimes grown-ups need to talk about important things." I knelt down to her level, smoothing her hair. "But you don't need to worry about that, okay?" She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty lingering in her expression. Another thing to add to my growing list of grievances against Deacon, his emotional distance wasn't just hurting me, it was affecting our daughter too. By the time we came back downstairs, Deacon had already left for work. No goodbye, no kiss, no acknowledgement of our conversation. Just an empty coffee mug in the sink and the lingering scent of his cologne. I dropped Elsie off at school, and drove to my job at the insurance office, my mind churning with frustration. As I settled at my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was slipping away from me, day by mundane day. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Callum. "Hope you're wearing that blue top today. Bet you look amazing in it." I smiled despite myself, feeling a flutter of excitement that Deacon hadn't stirred in me for months. Callum noticed things. He paid attention. He made me feel seen in a way that my husband had forgotten how to do. I glanced around the office, making sure no one was watching, then quickly snapped a selfie. The lighting was perfect, catching the way the blue fabric complemented my skin tone. I looked good, better than I had in years. "What do you think?" I typed, attaching the photo before I could second-guess myself. His response came back almost instantly. "Stunning. Your husband is a lucky man." The words sent a warm glow through my chest. When was the last time Deacon had called me stunning? When was the last time he'd called me anything other than my name? I was still smiling at my phone when I heard footsteps approaching my desk. I looked up to see Deacon standing there, his expression unreadable. "You forgot your lunch," he said, setting a brown bag on my desk. I thought I'd drop it off on my way to the client meeting. My phone was still lit up in my hand, Callum's message clearly visible on the screen. I saw Deacon's eyes flick down to it, saw the slight tightening around his mouth as he read the words. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I felt a spike of defiance. Maybe it was time he knew that other men found me attractive, even if he'd forgotten how to. "Just a friend from work," I said, not bothering to hide the phone. "Someone who actually notices when I make an effort." Deacon was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between my face and the phone in my hand. When he spoke, his voice was so soft I almost missed it. "I see." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me with my lunch and the sudden, uncomfortable feeling that I'd just crossed a line I hadn't meant to cross. But as I watched him disappear through the office doors, another part of me felt vindicated. Maybe now he'd understand what it felt like to be ignored. Maybe now he'd realize what he was losing. I looked back at my phone, at Callum's compliment still glowing on the screen, and felt that flutter of excitement return. For the first time in months, I felt alive. The office break room buzzed with the usual mid-morning chatter as I stirred sugar into my coffee, my mind still replaying the encounter with Deacon from the day before. The way he'd looked at my phone, at Callum's message, there had been something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Hurt, suspicion, or maybe, finally, a wake-up call. "You look different today," said Jenny from accounting, settling into the chair across from me. "Glowing almost. New moisturizer." I laughed, feeling a flush of pleasure. "Something like that." My sister Petra chose that moment to walk in, her nurse's scrub still crisp despite being halfway through her shift at the medical center next door. She often stopped by during her breaks, and seeing her familiar face usually lifted my spirits. Today, though, I felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. "Hey, stranger," Petra said, grabbing a yogurt from the refrigerator. "How's married life treating you?" The question hit differently than it usually did. Before, I might have given the standard fine, or can't complain. But today, with Callum's attention still fresh in my mind and Deacon's indifference still stinging, I found myself wanting to be honest. "Actually, it's been pretty rough lately," I admitted, watching Petra's eyebrows rise in surprise. "Deacon has been so distant, so wrapped up in work, that he barely notices I exist." Jenny leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "Oh, honey, that's terrible. Marriage shouldn't feel like you're invisible." "Exactly." I felt validated by her understanding. "I mean, yesterday I bought this beautiful new blouse, did my hair, really made an effort, and he barely glanced at me, just grunted nice and went back to his phone." Petra frowned, stirring her yogurt thoughtfully. "That doesn't sound like Deacon. He's always seemed pretty attentive when I've seen you two together." I felt a flicker of irritation at her defense of him. That's because he puts on a show in public. You don't see what it's like behind closed doors. The way he dismisses me, ignores me, treats me like I'm just part of the furniture. Have you tried talking to him about it? Petra asked gently. Of course I have, but he's always too busy, always has some excuse, some project, some deadline, some crisis at work that's more important than his wife's feelings. Jenny shook her head sympathetically. Men can be so clueless sometimes. They don't realize how their neglect affects us. Right? And then they act surprised when we start looking elsewhere for the attention we're not getting at home. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I saw Petra's expression shift from sympathy to concern. Looking elsewhere, she repeated carefully. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but pressed on, emboldened by Jenny's supportive nods. Not like that. Well, not exactly. But there's this guy at work, Callum, and he actually sees me. He notices when I make an effort, compliments me, makes me feel like a woman instead of just a housekeeper and babysitter. Oenone. Petra's voice carried a warning tone I didn't want to hear. It's harmless, I said quickly. Just friendly conversation. But it's nice to feel appreciated for once, you know? To remember what it's like when someone finds you interesting and attractive. Jenny nodded enthusiastically. You deserve to feel good about yourself. If your husband isn't giving you what you need, there's nothing wrong with finding validation elsewhere. Exactly. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just talking to someone who treats me like I matter. But Petra was looking at me with growing concern. Oenone, be careful. Emotional affairs can be just as damaging as physical ones. And if Deacon is really as neglectful as you say, maybe you should consider counseling instead of... Instead of what? I interrupted, feeling defensive. Instead of having a friend who makes me feel good about myself. Instead of remembering that I'm an attractive, interesting woman who deserves better than being taken for granted. That's not what I meant, and you know it. The tension in the break room was becoming uncomfortable. Jenny glanced between us, clearly sensing the family drama brewing. Look, I said, trying to smooth things over. I'm not planning to run off with Callum or anything dramatic like that. I'm just saying it's nice to have someone in my life who appreciates me. Someone who makes me remember who I used to be before I became just Deacon's wife and Elsie's mom. Petra sighed, her expression softening slightly. I just don't want to see you do something you'll regret. You and Deacon have been together for 8 years. Elsie needs both her parents. Maybe if I what? Keep pretending everything's fine while my husband treats me like I'm invisible. Keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of keeping the peace. My voice had risen, and I noticed other people in the break room glancing our way. I lowered it, but the intensity remained. I'm 32 years old, Petra. I'm not ready to resign myself to a loveless marriage just because it's convenient or safe. I deserve to feel alive, to feel wanted, to feel like someone actually cares about my thoughts and feelings. Jenny reached over and squeezed my hand. You absolutely do. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for wanting to be happy. Petra looked like she wanted to say more, but her phone buzzed with what was probably a page from the hospital. She glanced at it and sighed. I have to get back, she said, standing up. But Oenone, please just... Think about what you're doing, okay? Think about the consequences. After she left, Jenny shook her head sympathetically. Sisters can be so judgmental sometimes. She doesn't understand what you're going through. No, she doesn't, I agreed, feeling a mix of hurt and vindication. She's been with the same guy since college. She has no idea what it's like to feel unappreciated and taken for granted. My phone buzzed with a text, and I felt my heart skip when I saw Callum's name. Lunch today. There's a new cafe downtown I've been wanting to try. I looked at the message, then at Jenny, who was reading over my shoulder with an encouraging smile. That's sweet, she said. He's asking you to lunch. Just as friends, I said quickly, but even as I said it, I felt a thrill of excitement. Of course, nothing wrong with lunch between friends. I hesitated for just a moment, thinking of Petra's warnings. of the look on Deacon's face when he'd seen Callum's message yesterday. But then I remembered the way Deacon had dismissed my efforts, the way he'd barely looked at me, the way he'd made me feel invisible in my own home. "Sounds perfect," I typed back. "What time?" His response came immediately. "Noon, I'll pick you up." As I agreed to the plan, I felt a flutter of anticipation that I hadn't experienced in years. Someone wanted to spend time with me, wanted to take me somewhere nice, wanted to treat me like I mattered. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not just Deacon's neglected wife or Elsie's busy mother, but Oenone, a woman worthy of attention and appreciation. I didn't notice the figure watching from across the street as Callum helped me into his car at noon, his hand lingering just a moment longer than necessary on my arm as he opened the door. The aroma of pot roast filled our dining room as I set the last plate on the table, trying to ignore the knot of tension in my stomach. Sunday dinners with Deacon's mother Helen had become increasingly strained over the past few weeks, ever since she'd started making pointed comments about my new attitude and asking probing questions about how I spent my days. "Smells wonderful, dear," Helen said as she entered the dining room, though her tone suggested the compliment was more obligation than genuine praise. At 61, Deacon's mother still carried herself with the rigid posture of the high school principal she'd been for 30 years, and she had a way of making even casual conversation feel like an interrogation. "Thank you," I replied, forcing a smile as I called upstairs for Elsie and Deacon. "I tried that new recipe I found online." "Online," Helen repeated with a slight sniff. "I suppose that's where everyone gets their recipes these days. In my time, we learned from our mothers and grandmothers." The criticism was subtle but unmistakable, and I felt my jaw clench. Everything was a judgment with Helen: my cooking, my parenting, my marriage. And lately, her disapproval had become increasingly obvious. Deacon appeared first, looking tired and distracted as he'd been for weeks now. Since the incident with Callum's text message, he'd become even more withdrawn, speaking to me only when necessary, and spending most evenings in his home office. "Evening, Mom," he said, kissing Helen's cheek before taking his usual seat at the head of the table. Elsie bounded down the stairs moments later, her face lighting up when she saw her grandmother. "Grandma Helen, did you bring me anything?" "Of course, sweetheart," Helen said, her stern expression softening as she pulled a small wrapped package from her purse. "But dinner first, presents after." As we settled around the table, I tried to push away the memory of my lunch with Callum 2 days earlier. It had been innocent enough: good food, easy conversation, the kind of attention I'd been craving from Deacon. But the way Callum had looked at me, the way he'd listened to every word I said as if it mattered, had left me feeling more alive than I had in months. "So, Oenone," Helen said, cutting into her pot roast with surgical precision, "how have you been keeping yourself busy lately?" There was something in her tone that put me immediately on guard. The usual: work, taking care of Elsie, managing the house. And finding time for lunch dates, I hear." The words hit the table like a dropped plate. Deacon's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm sorry." "Oh, just something I heard through the grapevine. You know how small towns are. People talk." I glanced at Deacon, but his expression was unreadable. Had he told her, or had someone else seen Callum and me at the cafe? "I have lunch sometimes, yes," I said carefully. "With friends from work." "Of course." "Friends." Helen's smile was sharp as a blade. "How nice that you have such attentive friends." The implication was clear, and I felt my temper beginning to rise. How dare she sit at my table, eating my food, and make insinuations about my character? "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Helen, but—" "I'm not suggesting anything, dear. I'm simply observing that you seem to have developed quite an active social life recently. Maybe because I need some adult conversation that doesn't revolve around work schedules and household chores," I snapped, my carefully maintained composure finally cracking. The silence that followed was deafening. Elsie looked confused, glancing between the adults with growing anxiety. Deacon set down his fork entirely, his jaw tight. "Oenone," he said quietly, Maybe we should what? Pretend everything's fine? Pretend I'm perfectly happy being ignored and taken for granted?" Helen's eyebrows rose to her hairline. "Ignored? My son works hard to provide for this family." "Your son works hard to avoid this family," I interrupted, the words pouring out before I could stop them. "When was the last time he complimented me? When was the last time he acted like he was glad to come home to me? Other men notice me, Helen. Other men appreciate what they see." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, toxic and impossible to take back. Elsie's face crumpled, and she pushed back from the table. "I don't like it when people yell," she said, her voice small and scared. "Sweetheart, we're not." I started, but she was already running upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house. Helen's face had gone pale with anger. "How dare you," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you speak that way in front of your daughter, about her father?" "I'm just being honest about—" "You're being selfish and cruel," Helen shot back. "Deacon is a good man, a good father, a good provider. If you can't see that, if you're too busy chasing attention from other men to appreciate what you have—" "What I have," I laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. "What I have is a husband who treats me like a roommate, and a mother-in-law who thinks I should be grateful for the privilege of being ignored." Deacon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough." But I was beyond caring about his discomfort, beyond worrying about keeping the peace. Months of resentment and frustration came pouring out. "No, it's not enough. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm tired of being the only one who seems to care about saving this marriage. At least Callum makes me feel like a woman instead of just a convenient housekeeper." The name slipped out before I could stop it, and I saw Deacon flinch as if I'd slapped him. Helen's face went from pale to flushed with rage. "Callum," she repeated slowly. "I see. So there is someone specific." "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Helen said, standing up and throwing her napkin on the table. "You're having an affair, emotional or otherwise, and you have the audacity to blame my son for your own moral failings." "I'm not having an affair. I'm just talking to someone who actually cares about my feelings." "While neglecting your husband and traumatizing your daughter," Helen finished. "Deacon, I think it's time I left." She gathered her purse and coat with sharp, angry movements, her face set in lines of deep disapproval. "Helen, please," I said, suddenly realizing how far things had gone. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Oh, but you did," she replied coldly. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect to be called out for it." She kissed Deacon's cheek, her expression softening only for him. "Call me if you need anything, son. Anything at all." After she left, the house felt hollow and cold. Deacon stood by the window, watching his mother's car disappear down the street, his shoulders rigid with tension. "I should go check on Elsie," I said quietly, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Don't," he said without turning around. "Just don't." I watched him walk upstairs, heard his gentle voice comforting our daughter, heard Elsie's muffled sobs through her bedroom door. The sound cut through me like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. When I finally went upstairs an hour later, I found Deacon in our bedroom, methodically packing clothes into an overnight bag. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "I'm going to stay at my mum's tonight," he said without looking at me. "Elsie needs some space, and frankly, so do I." "Deacon, we need to talk about this." "No," he said firmly, zipping up the bag. "We don't. You've made your feelings perfectly clear, Oenone. About me, about our marriage, about this Callum person." The way he said Callum's name made me wince. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" He turned to face me then, and I was shocked by the pain in his eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been having an emotional affair and is now using our family dinner to humiliate me in front of my mother and traumatize our daughter." That wasn't my intention. Your intention stopped mattering the moment you decided to seek comfort in another man instead of working on our marriage. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll pick up Elsie for school tomorrow. We'll talk about arrangements after I've had some time to think. Arrangements? The word sent a chill through me. What kind of arrangements? But he was already gone, leaving me alone in our bedroom with the echo of his footsteps and the growing realization that I might have just destroyed everything I'd been trying to save. The house felt suffocatingly empty without Deacon and Elsie. I'd spent the day alternating between righteous anger and creeping anxiety, replaying the dinner conversation and trying to convince myself that I'd been justified in my honesty. But as evening approached, the silence became unbearable. I'd called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of pretending everything was normal while my marriage fell apart. Instead, I'd spent hours cleaning the house with manic energy, as if scrubbing the kitchen counters could somehow erase the damage I'd done. My phone had been buzzing all day with messages, concerned texts from Petra asking if I was okay, a terse message from my mother Ruth demanding to know why Helen had called her in tears, and several increasingly worried messages from Callum asking why I hadn't come to work. It was Callum's attention that provided the only bright spot in an otherwise miserable day. While my family was pulling away from me, he was reaching out, concerned about my well-being, offering support and understanding. "Are you okay?" his latest message read. "Jenny said you called in sick, but you seemed fine yesterday. If you need to talk, I'm here." The kindness in his words made my throat tight with emotion. Here was someone who actually cared about how I was feeling, someone who noticed when I was struggling. Why couldn't Deacon show even a fraction of that concern? At 9 o'clock, I heard Deacon's car in the driveway. My heart hammered as I listened to his key in the lock, his quiet footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the living room doorway looking exhausted, his usually neat hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled. "How's Elsie?" I asked immediately. Confused, upset. She asked me why Mommy was angry at Daddy and Grandma. His voice was flat, emotionless. I told her sometimes grown-ups disagree, but that we both love her very much. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. "Deacon, I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean for Elsie to get caught in the middle of this. But you're not sorry about the rest of it, are you?" He sat down in the armchair across from me, maintaining careful distance. "You're not sorry about Callum, or about humiliating me in front of my mother, or about making it clear that you think I'm a failure as a husband. That's not what I said. It's what you meant." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "So, let's just cut through all the pretense, Oenone. What do you want? Do you want an open marriage? Do you want to separate? Do you want me to just look the other way while you have your emotional affair and pretend everything's fine?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to be angry, to yell, to demand that I stop talking to Callum. I hadn't expected this calm, devastating honesty. "I want you to fight for us," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I want you to care enough to get angry, to be jealous, to show some emotion about the fact that your wife is slipping away from you." "You want me to be jealous?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to compete with this other man for my own wife's attention? I want you to want me." The words exploded out of me, raw and desperate. "I want you to notice me, to compliment me, to act like you're glad I'm in your life. I want to feel like I matter to you, like I'm more than just someone who keeps your house clean and takes care of your daughter." "Our daughter," he corrected quietly. "And you do matter to me. You matter so much that watching you slip away from me has been killing me for months." The pain in his voice stopped me short. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to fix things?" "I did try. I've been trying. But every attempt I made to connect with you was met with criticism or indifference. You made it clear that nothing I did was good enough, that I was failing you in every possible way. So I stopped trying, because it hurt too much to keep being rejected." I stared at him, seeing for the first time the exhaustion and hurt he'd been carrying. "That's not... I didn't mean..." Didn't you? He pulled out his phone, and I felt my stomach drop as I recognized the familiar gesture. Because I've been paying attention, Oenone, more than you realize. He showed me the screen, and I saw a photo of my own phone display, a screenshot of my text conversation with Callum from several days ago. Messages I thought had been private, compliments and flirtations that looked damning in the harsh light of scrutiny. When you left your phone on the counter while you were in the shower, the notifications kept coming in, and I got curious about who was so eager to talk to my wife at 10 o'clock at night. My face burned with shame and anger. You went through my phone? I took pictures of what was already visible on the screen. Your privacy settings did the rest. His voice remained maddeningly calm. Interesting reading, especially the parts where you complain about your emotionally distant husband and talk about how much you enjoy the attention from someone who really sees you. Those conversations were private. Those conversations were about our marriage, Oenone, about my failings as a husband, shared with another man who's clearly interested in taking my place. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I felt trapped, caught between shame and defiance. I needed someone to talk to. You needed validation for an affair you were already planning. He stood up, pacing to the window. The question now is what we do about it. What do you mean? He turned back to me, and I was struck by how different he looked. Older, harder, more resolved than I'd ever seen him. I mean, I'm not going to compete with Callum for your affection. I'm not going to beg you to choose your husband over your boyfriend. And I'm not going to pretend this is somehow my fault because I didn't compliment your blouse enough. He's not my boyfriend. Yet. The single word hung between us like a blade. But that's where this is heading, isn't it? You've already checked out of our marriage emotionally. You're just looking for permission to make it official. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right, wasn't he? I had been imagining what it would be like to be with someone who appreciated me, someone who made me feel alive and wanted and special. I just want to feel alive again, I whispered. I want to feel like I'm more than just a wife and mother. I want to feel like I'm still me. And you can't feel that way with me. It wasn't a question, and the resignation in his voice broke something inside me. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know if we can fix this, Deacon. Too much has happened. Too much has been said. He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that answer. Then I guess we both know where we stand, he said. I'll be staying at my mom's for the rest of the week. That'll give you time to figure out what you really want. But Oenone, he paused at the doorway, his back to me. If you choose him, if you choose this affair over our family, there's no coming back from that. I won't be a backup plan or a safety net. I won't be the husband you settle for because the other guy didn't work out. What are you saying? I'm saying choose carefully, because whatever you decide, I'm going to protect myself and Elsie. I'm going to make sure we're okay, with or without you. After he left, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the detritus of our 8-year marriage, family photos, shared books, the couch we'd picked out together when we were young and hopeful, and certain we'd last forever. My phone buzzed with another message from Callum. Thinking about you. Hope everything's okay. I stared at the words, feeling the familiar flutter of excitement they always brought. Here was someone who wanted me, who thought about me, who made me feel special and desired. But as I typed back a response, I couldn't shake the image of Deacon's face as he'd walked away. Hurt, resigned, but also strangely determined. For the first time since this all began, I wondered if I'd underestimated my husband's capacity for self-preservation. And for the first time, I wondered if I was about to lose more than I was prepared to give up. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning in our empty bed, while Deacon's words echoed in my mind. By morning, I felt raw and exhausted, but I forced myself to get ready for work. Staying home would only give me more time to spiral into anxiety and second-guessing. The office felt different somehow, as if everyone could see the chaos of my personal life written across my face. I kept my head down, focusing on mundane tasks and avoiding eye contact with my coworkers. But by lunchtime, I couldn't resist the pull of Callum's concerned messages. "Meet me in the parking lot," he'd texted. "You look like you could use a friend." I found him leaning against his car, his expression soft with worry. The sight of him, tall, attentive, genuinely concerned about my well-being, made my chest tight with emotion. "Hey," he said gently, opening his arms. Without thinking, I stepped into his embrace, letting myself be held for the first time in days. He smelled like cologne and comfort, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like if this was my life, if I came home to someone who held me like this every day. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, his hands rubbing soothing circles on my back. "My marriage is falling apart," I said into his shoulder. "Deacon found out about our friendship, and he's acting like I've committed some terrible crime." "You're allowed to have friends, Oenone. You're allowed to talk to people who understand you." The validation felt like cool water on a burn. That's what I tried to tell him, but he's making it sound like something sordid and wrong. Callum pulled back to look at me, his hands still resting on my arms. "Maybe he's just scared of losing you. Maybe he realizes that he hasn't been giving you what you need, and he's lashing out." "Maybe." I looked up into his kind eyes, feeling that familiar flutter of attraction. "I just don't know if it's too late to fix things, even if we wanted to. Sometimes things have to fall apart before they can be rebuilt into something better," he said softly. "Sometimes we have to be brave enough to choose happiness over security." Before I could respond, I heard a car door slam nearby. I turned to see a courier walking toward the office building, a manila envelope in his hand and a purposeful expression on his face. Something about the scene made my stomach clench with unease, but Callum was already guiding me back toward the building. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you some lunch. You look like you haven't eaten in days." We were halfway across the lobby when I heard my name being called. "Oenone Greaves." I turned to see the courier approaching, his expression professionally neutral. "Yes?" "I have a delivery for you. I'll need you to sign here." My hand shook as I signed the electronic pad, accepting the thick envelope with my name typed across the front in official-looking font. The return address made my blood run cold. Henderson, Mills and Associates, Family Law. "What is it?" Callum asked, but I was already tearing open the envelope with trembling fingers. The words on the legal document swam before my eyes. "Petition for legal separation. Irreconcilable differences. Temporary custody arrangements." "Oh my God," I whispered, the papers fluttering to the floor as my knees gave out. Callum caught me before I could fall, his arm strong and steady around me. "Oenone, what's wrong? What are those papers?" "He's leaving me," I said, my voice hollow with shock. "Deacon is filing for separation." A small crowd had gathered in the lobby, drawn by the drama. I saw Jenny from accounting pushing through, her face creased with concern, and behind her, several other co-workers who were pretending not to stare while obviously listening to every word. "Here, let me help you," Callum said, gathering up the scattered papers. As he read through them, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Jesus, Oenone, he's asking for temporary custody of your daughter and... Wow, he's really covered all his bases here." The words hit me like physical blows. Custody of Elsie, the house, our joint accounts. Deacon wasn't just leaving, he was dismantling our entire life together with surgical precision. "I need to call him," I said, fumbling for my phone. "I need to explain." "Oenone, maybe you should call a lawyer instead," Callum suggested gently. "This is serious legal stuff. You need professional help." But I was already dialing Deacon's number, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hit the right buttons. It went straight to voicemail. "Deacon, it's me," I said after the beep, my voice cracking. "I got the papers. Please, we need to talk about this. You can't just... This isn't how we fix things. Call me back. Please." I tried 3 more times, each call going directly to voicemail, each message more desperate than the last. "He's not answering," I said to Callum, tears starting to blur my vision. "He won't talk to me." "Maybe he just needs some time to cool down," Callum said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe if you give him some space." "I don't have space to give." The words came out louder than I'd intended, drawing more stares from the growing crowd of onlookers. "He's trying to take my daughter away from me." Jenny appeared at my side, her face full of sympathy. "Honey, what can we do? Do you need someone to drive you home?" "I need to fix this," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "I need to make Deacon understand that this is all just a misunderstanding." But even as I said the words, I could hear how hollow they sounded. Because it wasn't a misunderstanding, was it? Deacon had found evidence of my emotional affair, had heard me publicly humiliate him in front of his mother, had listened to me admit that I wanted to feel alive again in ways that our marriage couldn't provide. "Come on," Callum said, taking my arm. "Let me drive you home. You shouldn't be alone right now." I let him lead me to his car, my mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. As we drove through town, I found myself looking at everything differently. The house where Deacon and I had planned to grow old together, the school where Elsie would start first grade in the fall, the life that was suddenly crumbling around me. "This is all happening so fast," I said, staring out the window. "Yesterday we were just having problems, and now he's filing legal papers." "He must have been planning this for a while," Callum said carefully. "You don't just wake up one morning and file for separation. There are lawyers to consult, papers to prepare." The implication hit me like a slap. While I'd been agonizing over our relationship, while I'd been seeking comfort in Callum's attention, Deacon had been quietly, methodically preparing to end our marriage. "He played me," I whispered, the realization dawning slowly. "He let me think he was just hurt and confused, but he was already 10 steps ahead." "Maybe he was just protecting himself," Callum suggested. "Maybe he knew this was where things were heading." When we reached my house, I sat in Callum's car for a long moment, staring at the home I might be forced to leave. The legal papers felt like lead weights in my lap. "What am I going to tell Elsie?" I asked, more to myself than to Callum. "You'll figure it out," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "And whatever happens, you won't be alone. You have people who care about you, people who see your worth, even if your husband doesn't." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes. Here was someone who wanted me, who thought I was worth fighting for, who saw me as more than just a wife and mother. "Thank you," I said softly, "for being here, for caring. I don't know what I would have done without you today." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "That's what friends do for each other." But as he said it, his thumb traced gentle circles on the back of my hand, and I knew we both understood that whatever was between us had moved beyond simple friendship. As I watched him drive away, I felt a strange mix of devastation and possibility. My marriage was ending, my life was falling apart, but maybe, just maybe, something better was waiting on the other side. I just had to be brave enough to reach for it. But first, I had to figure out how to fight for my daughter and salvage what was left of the life I'd built, even if I'd been the one to tear it down. The law office felt like a courtroom. Dark wood, towering legal books, heavy silence. 3 days after receiving separation papers, I sat trembling beside my lawyer, Patricia, facing Deacon and his attorney across the long table. His lawyer presented damning evidence: screenshots of my texts with Callum, parking lot photos, co-worker statements, and worst of all, audio from a family dinner where I'd cruelly humiliated Deacon in front of our 6-year-old daughter, Elsie. I listened to my own voice, sharp, selfish, followed by Elsie's frightened sobs. The judge's face hardened. Deacon sought primary custody, the house, and frozen accounts. I had nothing left to fight with. In the end, I agreed to supervised visitation, counseling, and cutting contact with Callum. Deacon walked away without looking back. I'd chased feeling alive and lost everything